If you look across societies, women mate across and up socioeconomic status hierarchies. So a woman will date and marry someone who makes the same amount of money for her or more. All right. So, and that's true regardless of the egalitarian nature of the society. It holds true in Scandinavia as well. Because you might say, well, that's because of women's lower socioeconomic position. But you can equate for that and you don't get rid of the phenomena. So one of the things that's driving the aggregation of wealth into fewer and fewer hands is the proclivity of well-off women only to marry men who are as well-off as they are or greater. Men will marry across and down socioeconomic status hierarchies. So if we're going to enforce equality, does that mean that we don't allow women to marry men who are richer than them? Men understand that there's a relationship between how successful they are and how attractive they are to women. And part of what motivates them is the game of that competition. You might say, well, women go after wealth, but I think that's nonsense. And I think that's also belied by the relevant evolutionary biology theory, because what it shows, and tell me if I've got this wrong, is that women use wealth as a marker for attractiveness because they use wealth as a marker for competence. And what they're after is the ability to generate wealth and to share it and to be generous with it. It has to be both productivity and generosity. And a decent marker for the capacity to generate wealth is wealth. Women are hypergamous. They want males who are of equivalent or higher status than them socially. And the same isn't true in reverse. And so what that seems to indicate is that women, and the data bears this out, by the way, women are not happy if they are associated with a relatively low status partner in comparison to their own status. And what that seems to me to mean is that to some degree, it's incumbent on women to support their husbands to the degree that's possible in achieving and maintaining the status that would make them as women satisfied. But I know there's something that's deep about it, and that it's something that our culture has done a very bad job of sorting out conceptually and technically. Female can identify what's poisonous early so that it doesn't become so poisonous that it's destructive. And that's part of that discretion and judgment.
Yes.
And she can bring that to the attention
exactly.
of her mate. If you look in the modern world, for example, and you try to predict number of available sexual partners for a given male, your best predictive measure of that is income. And the best predictive measure of that is intelligence and conscientiousness. Women aren't after resources. That's wrong. They're after the factors that predict resources. So what we did was we showed women a bunch of pictures, say several pictures of the same guy. So there was several guys. And each guy was in 4 conditions. The photo of each guy was in 4 conditions. Same photo, right? So one guy was poor and useless. One guy was rich and useless. One guy was rich and useful. And one guy was poor and useful. So the rich, useless guy had won a lottery, and it paid out like $4,000 a month for the rest of his life. So no matter how useless he was, he couldn't squander all of it. He had resources, right? The poor, useless guy, well, we don't even have to define that. Everybody understands that. The rich, useful guy, well, that's easy to understand. The poor, useful guy worked for a non-governmental agency. It was a charity, in a charitable organization. And so he had high occupational status, but low income, and that wasn't likely to change. So then we asked women to rate these men on a bunch of different attributes, including personality, but also on dateability, basically, and also on probability of considering a long-term relationship with someone like this. And wealth had no main effect. The only effect was usefulness. So the poor useful guy and the rich useful guy were attractive, more attractive to the women than the 2 useless guys, regardless of their socioeconomic status. And the women judged the useful guys as higher in openness and conscientiousness, which was pretty smart, because openness is basically intelligence and conscientiousness is hard work, and those are the best predictor of socioeconomic success. So, and then, there are certain physical characteristics, wide shoulders in men and narrow waist. And what's interesting is that, if you take 60 people, let's say if you took 60 women and you asked them, you showed them a bunch of men and you asked them to rank them in terms of their attractiveness, there's going to be fairly consistent rankings. We know what makes up attractive facial features for women and for men. It's easy to determine that. What you do is you take 60 faces and you average the features. So you don't get the average person, because the average person is more like a median. You get the averaged person. And the average person has perfectly symmetrical features that are nicely shaped and fairly big eyes, and they're very, they're very nice looking. They're very attractive. And so that means that there's like a central human form, in a sense, that we find attractive. And we see this in other species. For example, there are butterflies who won't mate with another butterfly if it's like a 1/16 of an inch out of symmetry, because then it's not a butterfly of that type, and that's how people think too, is the more you deviate from the average person, the less canonically human you appear, and the less attractive that you appear. And so, we're chasing this ideal, in some sense, that's an emergent property of the nature of our species. There is an ideal, like a Platonic ideal, lurking at the back of our minds, against whom we compare everyone that we meet.